You might still be having some trouble with conditional introduction because it's the first rule that we learn how to do subproofs with. And there's also some complications that come up. For example, what if you have an argument where your goal is a conditional but there's no premises? That can be scary at first. So that would be represented something like this. You write T to say that this is a tautology, it has no premises. So, for example, you could have this be presented as one of your problems. How would you do this proof? So because you have no premises, you don't have a lot to start with, but you know that this is your goal. So I advise you to write your goal first so that you know what you are aiming for. Okay. But you just do the same thing you do every single time you do conditional introduction. It's actually no different whether you have premises or not. You always do the same thing. You always look at your goal and assume the antecedent of the goal. In this case, the antecedent of the goal is A and B. Then you need to somehow end your subproof when you have proven the consequent. So you assume the antecedent in line 1 of the goal, and then you anticipate that you want to end the subproof when you've proven the consequent. It should be clear to you that line 1 is a conjunction, so you can get A by conjunction elimination on line 1. And that's it. That's just conditional introduction, lines 1 through 2. It's very simple. Assume the antecedent and prove the consequent. Whether you have premises or not, it's always the same strategy. Assume the antecedent and prove the consequent. So don't let the lack of premises bother you. You might also, though, come upon something else, which is when you have to do subproofs within subproofs. So, for example, you might be trying to prove something like this. What if you had this here? So if you had this, right, we'll start by writing our premise, and then we write our goal down here. We have two conditionals here. In this case, though, we only have to prove one of them. So in this case, again, we assume the antecedent of the conditional we want to prove. The antecedent is this here. So it's P arrow R, right? We assume the whole antecedent. And then we want to prove the consequent, which is this. In this case, the same as our premise. So we can write reiteration of line 1 and we can be done. That's conditional introduction. Yeah. But if we have something slightly different, let's say still R as a premise, and then if P R arrow R, let's say now this is the problem we are attempting to do. So we write our premise here, and then we write our goal that we are attempting to get. Now, in this case, we have two conditionals to prove. So we start by assuming the first antecedent. So we just start one step at a time. We work from the outside in. We assume the first antecedent, and what we want the end of that subproof to be is the entire consequence here, right? That's going to be conditional introduction. But in fact, the consequent is itself a conditional. So again, within that, we assume the antecedent of R, and we attempt to prove the consequent of R. So in this case, this is a premise, this is an assumption, and this is an assumption. This is just reiteration of, you could say line 1 or line 3. I'll just say line 3. This is conditional introduction on, in this case, our conditional R was this subproof. So we want to cite lines 3 to 4. And for line 6, it's conditional introduction on this subproof. So we want to cite lines 2 to 5. But that's the basic idea of how you do a subproof within a subproof when you're doing conditional introduction. When you have to, for example, prove something where your goal has a conditional inside of a conditional, you need to just take it one step at a time. Assume the first antecedent, in this case, we move from left to right, so the first antecedent was just P, and then within that we needed a second subproof for this where we assume R and then prove R. So we just take it one step at a time, and we do the exact same thing every time we're doing conditional introduction. We assume the antecedent and we prove the consequent. So at this point, if you didn't get through the previous practice problems on conditional introduction, complete those now. Hopefully after this, you'll find them a little easier. Make sure you feel comfortable with the rules we've learned so far before moving on.